The UK government has urged businesses to tighten their cybersecurity amid a surge in Tehran-linked attacks that's following Israel's war on Iran. Prime Minister Keir Starmer said the increased activity should be considered an attack on our country, and Britain needs to be prepared. So, how worried should the UK be about this threat to national security? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Now, UK cybersecurity firms say there's been a sharp rise in attacks since Israel's war on Iran last month. Tehran has been blamed for targeting UK infrastructure before, including Parliament and public services. But with cyber criminals often one step ahead of online defence systems, how can the UK protect itself from increasingly sophisticated online attacks?
A 12-day war between Israel and Iran came to an end last week after Israel initially launched strikes on Iran to destroy the country's nuclear program. Despite there being a ceasefire, the UK government is concerned of potential Iranian cyber attacks.
There is not a week goes by without some sort of Iranian cyber attack on a key part of UK critical national infrastructure. There is Iranian activity on the streets of the UK, which is wholly unacceptable.
Following this increasing warfare in the Middle East, the threat of digital warfare is increasingly becoming a key battleground. The UK National Cybersecurity Centre has issued updated guidance stating public vigilance is key in what it calls a new era of state-backed digital threats. During Israel's war on Iran, the UK government made it clear they support Israel's security and the prevention of Iran obtaining nuclear weapons. Western nations, including the UK, have long placed sanctions on Iran, which has devastated the Iranian economy and healthcare services. Last year, MI5 chief Ken McCallum said authorities had stopped 20 state-backed plots hatched by Iran in the UK since 2022. The UK has suffered cyber attacks earlier this year on some of its biggest retailers and previously seen attacks across different industries, such as telecoms, finance, retail and gaming. So has Israel's war on Iran made the UK more susceptible to a cyber attack, and what can be done to ensure the safety of the UK?
Well, let's bring in our guests. I'm delighted to say here in the studio with me we have Harry Halem. Harry is a senior fellow at Yorktown Institute. In Grenoble, in southern France, we have Emad Kiyaei. He's director at the Middle East Treaty Organisation. And in Gloucester, in England, Graeme Stewart, head of public sector, that's at Checkpoint. You're all very welcome to this roundtable. Graeme, to you first. The business secretary in the UK, Jonathan Reynolds, says that not a week goes by without someone from Iran targeting the UK. Are we right to be worried?
Yeah, this is not just even Iran. If you look at it in a wider context, this is the worst I've ever seen. The level of attacks across the UK cyberspace. So at Checkpoint, we give you an example of the NHS. We reckon we're repelling 1,400 attacks a day, and they're major assaults on NHS organisations. So you bring into the mix Iran and what's going on and their efforts. Suddenly this gets to a situation that's almost unprecedented.
Emad, to you, 1,400 attacks a day against the National Health Service in the UK being repelled. I mean, the attackers just need to get lucky once, don't they?
I mean, yes. I mean, the issue with cyber attacks is that it's very difficult to pinpoint the individuals or the institutions behind them that are inflicting the harm. That being said, I want to frame this in a much larger context, because this is not happening in a void. Iran-UK relations have been marred for decades, and it has a long checkered history. And therefore, Iran government sees this within the context of a much wider information war, and one that has been seen from their end as UK following suit with Western countries backed by the United States in their coercive attacks and actions towards Iran. So this is framed in that context, where you see Iranians using whatever ability they've got to inflict some harm to their adversaries. And unfortunately, at the moment, UK and Iran are seen through that lens.
So, Emad, a lot of people will have watched the news over the last 2 weeks and they will have seen Israel bombing Iran and Iran then retaliating against Israel. And they will be thinking, well, this has nothing to do with me. And suddenly their hospital could be hit by a cyber attack because Iran has stepped up its efforts against the UK.
Well, once again, UK is not necessarily has clean hands in this latest attack by Israel on Iran's nuclear facilities, military and civilian infrastructure. Again, when we look at what has happened and the green light that Washington gave Israel, seemingly, that to do these attacks, Iran sees it as an allied front against it. And in that includes the United Kingdom. And this is, you can see from the policies of the UK's foreign, approach to Iran in terms of sanctions, in terms of, closing down actually many Iranian facilities within the UK, by the way, including the press TV, for example. And this complex situation pits Iran in a very difficult situation where it is going against not just Israel and the United States, but NATO and by extension, the UK.
Thanks, Emad. Harry, to you, the language Graeme used, unprecedented times we're living in, the number of attacks. Do you agree with that?
To a degree, of course, from a numerical perspective, the NHS hasn't been under this kind of assault by Iran at any given point. That being said, we've seen an enormous amount of Iranian pressure, penetration, and active operations on British soil for a very long time. As much as one might point to the UK in instigating this crisis, in the end, it's the Iranian regime, specifically the Islamic Republic, the regime, that has decided to pursue a policy that is contrary to British interests, that's contrary to Allied interests, and then in the end, threatens the survival and security of British citizens. On British soil, Iran has attempted to kidnap dissidents and other individuals, whether or not they have British nationality. On British soil, Iran has attempted to gather intelligence on targets active in the United Kingdom. And on British soil, Iran has attempted to intimidate those who would criticize the Islamic Republic on obvious and unmistakable human rights grounds. Ergo, when we combine these forces together, it's very, very hard to say in the broader timescale that Iran's attacks are truly unprecedented. This has been going on for a very long time. It's simply that British citizens are now confronted with the reality that Iran is, unfortunately, hostile because of its regime.
And tell me, Harry, when we talk about these cyber attackers, where are they based? They won't necessarily be anywhere near the UK, presumably.
Naturally, of course, it's very hard to determine attribution for a variety of cyber attacks, although the more sophisticated an attack becomes, the easier it is to identify who's conducted it and typically to identify whether a state has conducted it. Now, depending on the types of attacks that are being mounted on the NHS, for instance, one can very conceivably see various ransomware attacks, different other sorts of DDoS attacks that are easier to execute and therefore can be sourced from the criminal underworld. Yet, we also know that the Iranian state, as a matter of policy in many respects, has interfaced with criminal elements in order to evade sanctions and use offensive cyber tools as a means of projecting power. Ergo, it's relatively easy for us to understand that Iran, as a matter of policy, has made various targets in the UK something that it would like to prosecute.
Thanks, Harry. Graeme, to you, just how much damage would one of these attacks do if it did manage to penetrate, say, a hospital system?
Well, I mean, you've got a recent example. So in June of last year, there was an attack on an outsourced provider for NHS organisations in London that took down the pathology services. And quite often when you see reports around cyber attacks, you get the numbers that are quoted in the media, 200,000 people's details compromised, or large-scale numbers. And actually, whilst that's bad, it's not that causes the problem. It's the service degradation. So in the NHS attack last year on the outsourced pathology services provider, it degraded the services in the NHS organisations that were customers down to 10%. Now, what that means is no blood tests, no blood results, which means no cancer treatment. It puts enormous pressure on A&E services. And it was reported, I believe, last week that somebody actually died as a result in a UK hospital because their blood test actually was late. And so as a result of that, that person didn't get the medicine that they needed in time. And so, these effects aren't just on the organization. And for a long time, reports have always been about the numbers of people's details that have been stolen. And frankly, that's not the issue. The issue is the service degradation. You can get people's details, frankly, by hacking Facebook and scraping details off of Facebook and other social media. It's the service degradation that causes the problem. And actually, it's that which we should be worried about. And I'd like to pick up on a point Harry said a moment ago. The different types of attackers in these environments are really interesting. So we're talking about here nation state stuff, so Iran, but you've also got North Korea, Russia, China, and other organizations. But you've got two other types of organizations that conduct these kind of attacks, and that Harry was alluding to. So you've got the politically motivated gangs that, or even sponsored by nation state. And they conduct themselves, and typically they'll go after similar but different targets to that which the nation state. But you've also got the kind of sort of copycat organizations that were financially motivated, that will use the kind of noise of all of these cyber attacks to get in and conduct their own attacks. And these are typically much more financially orientated. So the attack on the hospital last year was a ransomware demand. It was in any shape or form, in old money, a bank heist. They were trying to hold up an organization for money, and we're using ransomware and service degradation as the hostage. So this situation is you've got these three different types of attackers conducting slightly different, varied attacks on different targets, and it has a human impact, as has been demonstrated last week.
Emad, to you, what can a business or a hospital, any organization do then as a matter of urgency if these attacks are imminent?
Well, I mean, luckily, in terms of capabilities, UK and other leading economies have a lot of tools at their hands to be able to counter these cyber attacks. We have seen actually the lack of success rate being an indicator of the fact that the use of these cyber attacks have not been effective from the Iranian side in terms of penetrating into the key infrastructure in the UK. So it's not like, this bombardment is coming from Iran and there's no tools or avenues for the UK and others to be able to resist it. That being said, it is again important to say that from what we are seeing here, if we narrow it, then yes, this is a tit for tat between Iran and UK, because UK also plays an important role in terms of how much harm is being done to the Iranian economy and politics, and in terms of its relationship. And so from the Iranians, again, they see it as, an adversarial relationship where they are, talk about impact. The sanctions on Iran has devastated Iranian healthcare and social services, and the list goes on, the limitations on getting medications and so forth. We have thousands of Iranians who have lost their lives simply because of the sanctions that have been enforced by Western powers, including the United Kingdom. Thanks so this actually has, at the end of the line, a huge human cost within Iran.
Thank you. Harry, so Israel and Iran have just fought this 12-day war. How much fire does Israel get in terms of cyber attacks then from Iranian sources? If the UK is under unprecedented pressure, I would imagine the Israelis must be getting a lot as well.
Cyber operations have been a very standard tool for the Islamic Republic of Iran to employ, not only against the UK, against other targets in Europe, against the United States, and against Israel. In the late 2010s, early 2020s, there was a spate of attempted attacks where Iran, for example, tried to sabotage Israel's water supply, injecting a number of toxic chemicals into it that could have, had it succeeded, killed anywhere between thousands and tens of thousands of Israeli civilians. So this is obviously a threat that the Israelis are actively dealing with. It's, of course, not the only threat that they have on their plate. There is active threats of terrorism from Iranian-sponsored organizations throughout the Middle East that's directed at Israel. So from the Israeli point of view, this is but one of several threats that it has to address at any given time.
And how well equipped are they then compared to a country like the UK in terms of fighting back against cyber threats?
The distinction, of course, between the Israeli position and the British one is, as you said initially, Israel has just fought a direct war with Iran. The United Kingdom has not, whatever the statements of the Iranian regime might indicate. Ergo, the Israelis, having a broader set of problems, are also more capable of linking different actions together and imposing cost on Iran in return. The United Kingdom, of course, does not need to do this as actively yet, given the Iranians understand that they're under a severe degree of pressure, not just from the Israelis, but given the effects of this war on their domestic and governance systems and on the security state. Ergo, Israel is reasonably well equipped to prevent a major cyber incident from crippling its economy, much like the United Kingdom is. At the same time, as this crisis unfolds, we should expect more tit-for-tat escalation and the potential for more violence.
Graeme, talk to me about fighting back against these cyber hackers. I mean, have we any examples of them being caught or brought to justice in the UK? Or is all this being done safely from other countries and targeted directly at British firms and businesses and organisations?
It's an interesting one because the use of gangs by nation state gives a level of muddying the waters. So the attacks on the UK retailers that happened earlier on, sort of late spring, early summer, that was done by a gang that was using ransomware, and M&S is the most high profile, but there was also Co-op and also Harrods that were attacked, and apparently latterly they're now moving into the insurance space. The really interesting thing about these gangs is that they sit across multiple countries, because unlike doing a bank heist, you don't all need to be in the same place at the same time. They are geographically disparate, and the key thing about that is because they are geographically disparate, they sit in different legal jurisdictions, which means actually catching these people becomes really difficult. So the reason why nation states use these gangs is because they are literally spread around the world. And there was some arrests earlier on this year of someone in Florida. There was an arrest of somewhere else in the world. And all of these people were allegedly part of the Scattered Spider gang. And they all get given these slightly outlandish and possibly demeaning names. But nevertheless, this gang was a good example of what we would see, which is a geographically disparate gang. Hard, therefore, to kind of, it's not like you can kick down the door of a shed and there's 15 guys all hunched over laptops. It doesn't work like that. But what that means is it's really, really difficult to bring them to justice. And that's one of the reasons why they get used, because they are geographically disparate. And so, frankly, I think this kind of approach is well used for that reason. And it's not going to get any easier to get after these people.
Emad, in terms of catching these people, it strikes me that the technology is always several kilometres ahead than the policing trying to catch up. Is that a correct assumption?
Definitely. It's a cat and mouse game that has been ongoing, and as technologies advance, so does the ways in which these attacks are conducted. So it will be quite difficult, again, to pinpoint where and whom is responsible. And it's important to say that, I'm listening to Harry and Graeme, but I need to come out and say that, this is not like, the UK and Israel are sitting in the back and there's no response or to Iranian cyber attacks. We have Israel, who's done a military strike on Iran, has dragged the US into this 12-day war, has dismantled to a great degree or damaged Iranian infrastructure. And that is, let's go back to where all of these things are starting, because it's not a one-way street. So Iran, in its tool set that it can to retaliate, one of them is cyber attacks. because it doesn't have a functioning air force. And we have seen how battered it got, and it did respond with its missiles against Israel. But in the end of the day, we are in a shadow war between Iran and the West, and they see these decades-long policies of undermining the Iranian government, and in the process, by the way, undermining the ambitions and wishes of the Iranian people, because sanctions at the end of the day, or covert operations or assassinations or sabotage of nuclear facilities, again through cyber attacks by Israel, by United States and others who have come together and done this, is the reason why we have this cycle of violence and cycle of retaliation continue. To
Thanks,
break
Emad.
it, we can get to it in the next comments.
Thank you. Harry, I noticed the UK has brought in something coming into effect this month, the Foreign Influence Registration Scheme. So if you've been told or paid or asked to work on behalf of a foreign state actor against United Kingdom interests, you have to come forward and register. Is this a smart move, or is this really naive?
It's not only smart, but has been necessary for a very long time. It's been a major gap in the way that this country has gone about actually thinking about who it identifies as a potential foreign agent. It's not necessary, of course, to be a hostile foreign agent. There are plenty of individuals who are well-meaning, who have British interests in mind, who nevertheless work for other powers. They must nevertheless register, as they do, for example, in the United States. It is, however, somewhat concerning that there are certain exceptions to this registration rule, namely, for instance, at this point, China. China is not covered as a high-risk country under this new legislation.
Should it be?
Well, it was recently identified in the UK's Strategic Defence Review as a clear long-term strategic competitor and a threat to long-term British interests. Ergo, why would it not be identified as a country of risk? And why would it not be identified as a country that if one is working for it, one should register under this scheme? There's a deep incoherence at the fundamentals of the government's current policy towards China more broadly that's drawn out through this registration scheme.
But Harry, is anyone really going to come forward and say, hands up, I'm working for Iran? They're not going to do it, are they?
Naturally, this raises questions about the relationship more fundamentally that the United Kingdom has with Iran and the hostility that the Islamic Republic of Iran, the regime itself, has towards the UK. The UK is part of the tapestry of ideological narratives that the Islamic Republic uses to justify its own existence and, quite frankly, take actions that are of enormous detriment to the hopes and dreams of the Iranian people, such as sponsoring terrorism, such as conducting actions on British soil, such as pursuing, quite likely, a nuclear weapon and destabilizing the Middle East, all of which directly contravene British interests, and all of which, once again, contravene the interests of Iran's own population and citizens, who, by and large, don't seem to support the full scope of these actions. Ergo, it's a reasonable enough question to ask whether an honest individual would come forward and admit that he or she is in the employ of the Iranian government. That simply points to the fundamental threat that the Iranian regime, as currently constituted, and with its ambitions, poses to the United Kingdom today.
Thanks, Harry. Graeme, we see a lot of TV dramas and films about the intelligence services in the UK, MI5 and MI6. How much do you think their work has changed now to zone in on these guys and girls in the hacking sphere targeting the UK?
So it's reasonable to suggest that you've got organisations like GCHQ, Signals Intelligence, National Centre for Cybersecurity. They'll be very focused on this. Cyber forms one of the additional domains that they will be looking into, so organised crime, terrorism, that kind of thing. Cyber terrorism, cyber crime now moves into it. So not just international, but domestic as well. So you'd be reasonable in your assertion that MI5 and MI6 would be involved in this space. And it's interesting, if you, again, look at some of the context, one of the things we've not covered here is one of the things that the Iranians have been doing is they've been going after journalists. And they've been going after, we've just published a piece of research we did around them going after Israeli journalists. There was reports a couple of weeks ago of the Washington Post journalists having their emails hacked and things like this. So certainly the work that NCSC and 5 and 6 will be undertaking will be not just on take down, type activities, going after hospitals, going after things like that, but also areas where you're targeting the press, free speech, and things like that, which could conceivably described as part of the critical national infrastructure.
Emad, to you, how much responsibility do individual employees now have then to be cyber aware and cyber secure when logging in, checking emails, doing your daily work?
Of course, we need literacy in emerging technologies, and that's extremely important in the age of what we're seeing with artificial intelligence and other forms of murking reality with virtuality. So I think that education awareness is extremely key to mitigate some of these attacks from the get-go. And it's one of the key, I think, instruments that we have that we can actually be able to stop these waves of attacks, because in most cases, human error or human ignorance is key in enabling these attacks to be successful.
Harry, thank you so much for your insight on this one, and to Emad and Graeme as well, an excellent roundtable. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Just search for Roundtable TRT World. But for now, from me, Enda Brady, and all the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.